Hey, fourth and fifth graders. I decided to find a little wooded area of a park near my house today and go tracking, looking for clues of animals, even if I can't find the animals themselves. And one of the main ways you can go tracking is by looking for the paw or footprints of animals, also called the tracks. That's why they call it tracking. So, me and Sprocket, where's Sprocket? Sprocket, look at the camera. Hi, Sprocket. Sprocket. Me and Sprocket have come out to the park and we're gonna go look for some muddy areas because that's the best place to find where an animal has sunk in a little bit and you can see the shape of its foot or its paw to figure out what kinds of animals have been in this park recently. Let's go together. Do you see how these paw prints have the nail marks where the dog nails were poking in? And you can see how the paw pads are kind of spread out. So that means that not only can we tell it's some sort of dog with the nails, since cat nails are retracted when they're walking, but we can also tell it's a domestic dog, some sort of pet dog, not a coyote, because of the paw pads being more spread out and less kind of coming together at a point at the top. So there was a pet dog here at some point. I can even hear a dog barking. Maybe it was that one. A muddy section of a trail like this is often a really great place to find tracks. Let's see if we can find any here. Oh yeah, so it looks like there's a dog right there. You can see the little nail marks and the spread out toe pads. And then looks like another dog right there. And I can tell this is still a dog even though it's hard to see the nail marks because this mud is a little bit drier, so the nail marks just aren't as deep, but they're still there. And it's just kind of the general oval shape of the toe pads also helps me figure out that it's a dog. So a few dog tracks. I don't see anything else in here. Let's keep looking. Now, I don't see any tracks here, but I do see some evidence of another animal or animals. Do you see all those feathers in there? Are there any other ones nearby? Whoa, there's a lot more over here and even more right there. There's a whole pile of feathers. So that gives me a clue that something rough happened here because a bird doesn't naturally lose this many feathers, especially feathers like flight feathers and tail feathers all in one place usually. So that tells me that maybe there is some sort of owl nest above me and an owl has been eating this other smaller bird. So I can kind of check above me. Nope. Not really even a big enough tree, mostly just sky. So that leads me to believe that it was some sort of bird of prey, like an eagle or a hawk, that had grabbed a bird up in the air and maybe some of the feathers fell off, or a bird was hanging out down here on the ground and another animal attacked it and ate it. So very interesting. It looks like there was some sort of bird struggle here. I'm sorry for you, bird, but I'm glad you hopefully fed another animal. A great place to look for tracks is right around puddles or streams or ponds because for two reasons. One is that often the wetness of the puddle or stream or pond creates some mud around it for animals to leave tracks in more easily. But also, why else do you think it might be a place where animals might come? For drinking. This one looks a little scuzzy. I don't know if animals would drink out of this one, but it is a good place as a tracker to focus your attention if you do have a little water area or a pond or a stream to look for tracks because sometimes animals come down to that area to drink. And I'm not seeing any fresh tracks right around in here. There might be some remnants of some old tracks, but Like I said, this might not be a great drinking source anyway, but check out if you have water sources near you that have mud around it, because that's one of the best places to look for animal tracks. If you also have a place that's near-ish your home that you can go with your family sometime over the next few days or whenever really in your life and explore a little bit and go tracking, I encourage you to do that. I am attaching a sheet that has very common tracks of animals in Seattle, and specifically I made it for Thornton Creek, so if you're in that neighborhood you could go use it around Thornton Creek, but it has very common animals that could be found in Seattle with their tracks, and so you can take that with you and use it as a resource to help you identify any tracks that you may find. If you do find some tracks, send me some pictures. I would love to see what tracks you find and your guesses on which animals made them. Enjoy and go explore. I'm back home now, and I'm going to introduce you to the tracking guide sheet that I'm sending out to you that you can use in a nearby park or trail or even in your own backyard. Because honestly, a lot of these animals actually go through your yard also, usually in the nighttime when you can't see them. And so it's an especially fun place to look for tracks during this wet, muddy weather we're having. So even if you can't go to a park nearby, you can still be an awesome tracker in your own backyard. All right, let me share my screen with you and show you the guide sheet. These are the most common urban animals that we have in Seattle that you might find the tracks of when you're going out tracking. And I'm going to just introduce some of the main differences and similarities to keep your eyes out for. So for instance, the beaver, gray squirrel, raccoon, and possum, they all are similar in many ways with their shape. They have almost finger-like shapes in their paws, but the biggest difference is, well, big or small, the size. Because the beavers, obviously, especially with their hind feet, you can see the webbing in there that sometimes shows on the track, sometimes doesn't. But that hind foot is, as you can see the writing right there, it says 6 inches long. That's going to be a pretty big track. And that means that the front foot is about 3 or 4 inches long. And then the gray squirrel is clearly so much smaller. If you think about a cute little squirrel's body and their teeny tiny little paws, it might be a similar shape to the beaver, but way smaller. And squirrels have a fun way of kind of bounding across something they're running when they're running. And so their tracks almost look a little backwards with their back feet in front and their front feet in back for what the track leaves when they're bounding, because their front feet plant and then their back feet kind of come around as they're bounding through the forest. So that's the gray squirrel. And then the raccoon and the possum are both very hand-shaped, very similar to our hands, and even the way they use their paws are very similar. If you've ever watched a raccoon or a possum pick some food up or climb up a tree, they have really cool hands, hand-like uses for their paws. But you can see that there's some differences in the shape of those paw prints and also the size. So raccoons are going to be a little bit bigger. So their hind one is going to be about 3 to 4 inches long, whereas the possums is only going to be about 2.5 inches long. And it's probably a good idea to take a ruler or a measuring tape with you when you go tracking, or at least kind of eyeball it with the size of your finger. Most of your fingers are probably about 2 inches long, maybe a little bit longer or shorter, depending on if you have short or long fingers. But you can kind of lay your finger down and use that as a great estimate too for size. And then you can see that raccoons generally kind of walk with more of a planted foot, like I'm a raccoon, than the possum, which has kind of lighter little walking motion. So the raccoon prints are generally going to be more flat and solidly sunk into the mud, and the possum is generally going to sink down in little parts, and kind of especially where they have more curved paw pads, but less of the solid, here's my full print, than the raccoon. And then ones that a lot of people get mixed up are cats and dogs, because you can see that they also have a similar shape. Cats and dogs all have four main pads in the front and then a middle pad in the back. And if you're out in a forest or a trail away from the city, you might see not domestic cat prints, like wild cats, like bobcats or cougars even. They have big tracks. And you might see coyotes, or if you're out in the wild, like farther from the city, wolves. But the big difference between any type of cat, whether it's domestic, like a pet cat, or a wild cat, or pet dogs or wild dogs, is their nails. Because if you have a cat, you might have noticed this before, cats walk super stealthily and silently because they can retract their claws. You might have heard me talking about this in the earlier video clip when I was at the park. So cats are able to pull their claws back, kind of like the Wolverine X-Man character, can pull the claws back or push them out to attack or scratch. But when cats are walking, they pull their claws back into their skin above their paws so that they're silent and sneaky. But dogs, and if you have a pet dog, you probably know what I'm talking about too, they can't pull their nails back. They can't retract them. They just walk with their nails out. And so you can hear dogs, especially if you have any hardwood floors in your house and you have a dog, they tap with their nails as they walk. Click, 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 click. They're not as sneaky as cats. So when you're looking at the tracks, if you see toenail marks, and they're not always this like nice defined little triangle like it shows in the picture. Often they're just like a little point where the nail stuck down into the mud. But if you see the markings of nails, it's definitely a dog. And if you don't, it's probably a cat. Although like that track I saw at the park, in the slightly harder mud, if the mud is harder, the nails might not always go in as much. So it's a little tricky sometimes. You can't for sure say it's a cat just because you can't see nails. So you also need to look at the shape. So the cat's shape is generally kind of more of a circle if you were to draw a line around the edge of all of the paw pads, whereas either type of dog is going to be more of like an oval or a spread out shape if you were to draw a circle around the edges of the whole thing. And then also their paw pads for a cat are a little more rounded in the top four, and then their bottom pad is a little more bumpy. You can see the dogs have more just general flatter curves. So those are some other shapes to be able to look for between a cat and a dog. And if you find a cat print here, it's also probably going to be pretty small, about 1 or 2 inches, because basically the only cats we have here in the Seattle city area are domestic cats, pet cats. If you were doing this more on the edges of Seattle or a wild trail, then you might have some cats like bobcats or cougars that would be different sizes than the domestic cat one. We do, however, have wild dogs here in the city. We don't have wolves, but we do have coyotes. And coyotes are nothing to be worried about. They're not going to mess with you. So they're just cool, stealthy animals that just hang out in our urban setting and do their thing. They've adjusted pretty well to living around people. And so if you see the toenails, you know it's a dog, and then you have to be able to tell the difference between the coyote and the domestic dog. And you can see that the coyote's paw pads, they're more angled in, because a coyote kind of keeps its paw pads inward when it's walking. And so the toenails are a little bit more angled, the paw pads are a little bit more angled, whereas a pet dog just kind of clumps around when it's walking, so its paw pads spread out a little bit more. So you can see that difference in the shape of those paw pads. And then generally a coyote's paw pads tracks are going to be 2.5 to 3 inches long. And a dog is going to vary in size because you have everything from a little Chihuahua to, a bigger Great Dane or a St. Bernard paw print. So that's why I couldn't put an actual size. But that's why it's good also to be able to tell the difference in the shape between a coyote and a domestic dog. And then last but not least, the cute little bird tracks. And birds, as you probably remember from learning about birds in my class a few years ago, if you were at Perkins in kindergarten and first grade, they almost always have 3 toes in front and 1 toe in back. And that shows up in their tracks as well. They can be really little, from like a little chickadee, or they could be quite a bit bigger for, a great blue heron walking along the shore of a pond or something. But they almost always are the same shape. The only type of bird that we have here that has a different shape foot is a flicker or woodpecker. And they have 2 toes in front and 2 toes in back. And that's because they need to balance on a tree a lot more and kind of lean back and brace themselves more when they're pecking. But woodpeckers and flickers don't usually hang out on the ground, so it's unlikely you'll see their tracks. But if you do, that could be cool. But birds aren't as hard to get mixed up with other animal tracks just because of how skinny their little cute toes and feet are. So those are the most common tracks you might come across in Seattle. There are other possibilities too, but generally if you find some tracks here, those are going to be what you find. So good luck. Go out and explore sometime this weekend or sometime in the near future. And if you feel like it, send me any photos or video clips of the tracks you find and your guesses and the clues that made you think that for which animals made them. Good luck. Good luck, naturalists and survivalists, because tracking is also a very good survival skill. And have a great time out there. Get outside.